Hi, everybody. It's Marlene with Eerie News, and today is March 20th, 2022. And we're going to start with an unusual kind of story. A little bit sad if you really think about it, but the one of the reasons that I'm including it is because it involves a kid that they call in Spanish La Diablita, the Little Devil. This is out of New York Post. Right, MS-13's Little Devil to stand New York trial in brutal 2017 slaying. All right. Um, it goes on to say a female MS-13 gang member known as Little Devil will face trial Monday on charges she helped lure 5 young men into a savage 2017 ambush that left 4 of them dead. These are the 4 boys, because I hate to say it, but you could tell these were teenagers. Uh, Her name is Lenice Escobar, nicknamed Diablita, is charged with coaxing the unsuspecting victims, Michael Lopez, Justin Ibicura, Jorge Tigre, and Jefferson Villalobos, into a wooded area in central Islip, where they were beaten and hacked to death by MS-13 gangsters. Their mangled bodies were discovered near a soccer field in a central Islip park on April 12, 2017. A 5th victim escaped the massacre. In a December 2019 ruling, U.S. Circuit Judge Joseph Bianco alleged Escobar knowingly lured the unsuspecting victims to a prearranged location in the central Islip woods, where they were murdered with machetes, knives, and tree limbs. The judge said Escobar, who was 17 at the time, was suspected of instigating the murders along with another juvenile female by locating photographs of some of the victims flashing MS-13 gang signs on social media and then showing those photographs to MS-13 members. Federal prosecutors called the attack a horrific frenzy of violence in court papers. Additionally, Escobar discarded the bloody clothing that she had been wearing on the night of the murders, the court filing said. They claim Escobar was an associate of MS-13 who was trying to curry favor with the gang by luring the young men to their deaths. It's unclear whether the victims were rival gang members or just MS-13 wannabes. What a high price to pay for being a wannabe. Wow. 4 other MS-13 members are also accused of carrying out the fatal attack or awaiting trial, while 2 others have been sentenced to 50 and 55 years in prison. Excellent. One of them, Jorge Portillo, who was just 15 at the time of the killing spree, pleaded guilty to charges of murder, racketeering, and conspiracy in 2019. Escobar has pleaded not guilty to the federal charges. She'll be tried as an adult in federal court in Central Islip. Prosecutors said the trial is expected to take 3 to 4 weeks. Her attorney, Jesse Siegel, told the Associated Press that after almost 5 years, Ms. Escobar is looking forward to having her day in court. Yeah, I bet she does. MS-13, a notoriously vicious gang, also known as La Mara Salvatrucha, was founded by Central American immigrants in Los Angeles in the 1980s. It has since grown into a global criminal enterprise with a stronghold in Long Island. I'm telling you, what makes a teenager do that? In other words, lure these 4 into getting hacked to death. I don't know, because she was 17, but you don't wake up when you're 17 all of a sudden and do something like that. In other words, you were corrupted way before then. Way before then. I'm gonna follow this this trial of Diablita and see what comes of it. And I'm glad they're trying her as an adult also, by the way. The next story, let's change gears here. This is out of Mysterious Universe, a connection between B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and UFOs. Why not? What do B.B. King and Stevie Ray Vaughan have in common? If you said the blues, guitars, or membership in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you would be right. If you said UFOs, you would also be right. An unusual kind of generational connection. Recently, the daughter of B.B. King and the nephew of Stevie Ray Vaughan joined Tom Reed in honoring their fathers and uncle with a bench and a plaque at the Tom Reed UFO Monument Park in Sheffield, Massachusetts. How did Reed's 1969 UFO encounter bring these 3 together on a bench in 2022? Oh, I need to find out about this. Um, let's see. It says, well, this is, I guess this is what they've put on the bench itself. It says, on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I am pleased to confer upon you this governor's citation in recognition of the off-world incident on September 1st, 1969, which engaged the Reed family, which has been established. The Tom Reed UFO Monument Park is a few hundred yards from the covered bridge where then 9-year-old Tom, his mother, grandmother, and younger brother saw a bright UFO, were taken from their car, and woke up later not knowing what happened during the lost time. Other witnesses reported seeing UFOs at the same time to the police and local radio stations. After intensive questioning and investigations, the Great Barrington Historical Society declared a UFO sighting historically significant and true, and the governor of Massachusetts made it the first government-recognized UFO incident. Tom Reed opened the park in 2015, and it has endured its share of problems and controversies. In 1986, Tom Reed was a stage manager doing sound checks at the Agora Ballroom in West Hartford, Connecticut, when he first encountered the close-knit family and entourage of Stevie Ray Vaughan. Through their meeting, Reed became friends with Joshua Knight, another blues guitarist who played with Tyrone Vaughan, the son of Jimmy Vaughan, Stevie Ray's older brother. Knight was mentored by B.B. King and later collaborated with his daughter Rita Washington King on a spoken word album. We called them King of the Blues, I called him Dad. As quoted above, Knight believes in UFOs, and according to him, so does Tyrone Vaughan. All of those dots connected on the July 4th weekend in 2021 when Tom Reed spoke at a UFO convention in Roswell, New Mexico. In the audience was Josh Knight, who Reed drove back to Knight's home in Dallas, Texas. During that 8-hour trip, a lot of UFO conversation transpired, including talk about Reed's park. Knight is now a business manager for Rita King and Tyrone Vaughan, and he saw two connections between them and his friend Tom. All had an interest in UFOs, and all had lost their notable fathers and uncles when they were young. Knight got Reed in touch with King and Vaughan, and they agreed to honor their loved ones who died too young with a memorial bench and plaque at Tom Reed UFO Monument Park. In a recent radio interview, Rita King revealed that the King-Vaughan-Reed Memorial Bench and plaque will likely be dedicated in September for the anniversary of the UFO encounter. She sees the bench offering a place of solace where UFO enthusiasts can muse about music and fans of the artist can learn about one of the major UFO events in history. Kudos to Tom Reed for making such an unusual and fitting memorial to family, music, and UFOs, which is very interesting because the most unlikeliest people that you can think of sometimes have had some type of UFO encounter, whether it's a sighting or something much more up close and personal. This is another one. We're going to stay here on Mysterious Universe, which I thought is interesting because, everybody's waiting for the government. Let's say we're going to go with the U.S. government, but there's other worldwide governments I think hold secrets as well to finally disclose something significant. When I mean significant about UFOs, because I think that what they've let out so far is like everybody knows this, okay? And it's like they say something, but it really doesn't mean anything. But anyway, that's why I think the title of this is so interesting. How and why government agencies destroy top secret files we expect to be kept hidden. This was, it's a good question. How do you know something's been destroyed if it was hidden to begin with, so you never would know that it was missing? In other words, in my latest 2 articles, I made it clear that over the years and decades, more than a few highly sensitive government files on UFOs had gone missing, as in gone forever, and that eventually those same files were totally destroyed. It's not at all impossible. One such file, or multiple files, concerned the 1980 Rendlesham Forest UFO landing event. The other file was focused on Roswell. What else, of course? I've heard people say there is no way that such important material would ever be burned or shredded. You would be wrong, despite their importance. There is a perfect and controversial example that shows how and why high-level important U.S. government files were destroyed. In the case today, I'm talking about top-secret papers concerning the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program. The destroying of the MK-Ultra papers went down forever. Between 1972 and 1973. That was when massive amounts of MK Ultra files were destroyed on the orders of the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms. The reasoning behind the destruction was simple. The program was in danger of being compromised by the U.S. media and the U.S. Senate, and as most of the mind control work had long been perfected, the old historical records, which told the stories of the abuses that went on in the program, were deemed vital to be destroyed. But how did the situation come about? Let's see. It was in late 1972 that certain high-ranking figures in the CIA had been carefully and quietly providing U.S. journalists with high classified information on MKUltra. And it wasn't just information that was being clandestinely shared, but official MKUltra documents too, with such secret papers in the hands of the press, which revealed the long and shocking story of how the CIA had been using people against their will in their mind manipulation programs. All hell broke loose in the CIA. Helms demanded to know who was doing the leaking. It was imperative, he said, that whoever was doing it should be found and arrested as soon as possible. The answer to who it was that was given such material to the media was never firmly proved, but there is no doubt that it was a Deep Throat meets Edward Snowden type character. When the U.S. media began to write what it knew about MKUltra at the time, which was limited but certainly growing in clarity, the U.S. Senate took notice too. Matters were in danger of spiraling out of control, and rapidly so too. Director Helms knew that something had to be done. Otherwise, just about everything MKUltra had ever been done would soon be in the public domain. Helms chose none other than Sidney Gottlieb to take control of the situation. Gottlieb, having been the man who ran the occult-driven Operation Often program, which began in the latter part of the 1960s, Helms ordered Gottlieb, on the morning of January 30th, 1973, to drive over to a certain installation owned by the CIA in Warrenton, Virginia. It was a facility which just happened to house hundreds of thousands of pages of MKUltra-themed documents. The director of the facility was outraged. After all, we're talking about massive amounts of documentation from one of the CIA's most significant projects being destroyed at what pretty much amounted to a whim. But that same director was hard in a position to argue, as the orders were coming from the most senior figure in the CIA, Richard Helms. Sidney Gottlieb arrived early in the morning and ordered that every single piece of paper on MKUltra be made available to him. Cart upon cart of files were taken to the facility's furnace. Gottlieb then ordered personnel from the Technical Services Division to destroy the files by burning them all. Gottlieb stood in grim-faced silence as the documents were destroyed. It was an operation which took most of the day. When the task was over, Gottlieb returned to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and told a relieved Helms that the job had been completed. That was not the end of things, though. An order went out to every CIA substation, to every college and university that may have conducted research on MKUltra for them, and to every other arm of the intelligence community to destroy anything and everything linked to the program. Inevitably, some, in fact many, survived the order of destruction. What this tells us is that extremely important files can get burned or shredded by government agencies. And with MKUltra were burned and were shredded. And those files will never be seen again, simply because they no longer exist. That could well be the case with Roswell and Rendlesham too. So many ufologists assume that secret UFO files are always hidden away, when really they're just 100% destroyed. Okay, and this article is written by Nick Redfern, and you know what? Like I said, some of these items or some of these documents or files, especially if they're older, because remember, a lot of these things that were written in the 60s, we're assuming have never been scanned into a memory stick. So, in other words, that we're assuming here that because this was done in the 1970s, back then that didn't exist. So, in other words, it was a paper environment. And how many other, black ops, hidden projects that we don't even suspect, not that we know about them, but when we know we don't know something, but we don't know of their existence, period, that if they're destroyed, we would never be the wiser. It's like, How can you miss what you don't know about? And I have a feeling that there's a lot of those out there. I think it's almost like I've heard this expression where something is used as the chew toy. It's almost like MK Ultra is the chew toy for maybe Black Ops or CIA kind of weird stuff. But there's other things out there that it's like they're talk under the radar. It's like way under the radar, way like under the radar. Let's go to a. Let's stay on the. As a matter of fact, let me see. Where's Let me see if I can find the. This is. Let's stay on the UFO thing. All right. Let me see if I can find where did he put his part one. The story behind the psychic incident. All right. Part two. Okay. We're there. So, well, okay, it's going to be part two. I don't understand where part one is. I wish I could find it and we'd go back to this. Again, we're still on, let's see. You know what? I'm going to try to find that part one on this one. But let's go to this because even though I think this is really interesting, this is titled Mysterious Havana Syndrome Hits U.S. Diplomats in Geneva and Paris. All right. And quote is saying, today we don't know exactly what happened and we don't know exactly who's responsible. Now, if anybody remembers, this was something that started out in Havana. Nearly 6 years ago, after U.S. and Canadian embassy workers in Havana, Cuba began suffering from what is now called the Havana Syndrome, unexplained health incidents, including hearing loss, memory loss, nausea, and feelings of pressure, vibrations, and mysterious noises coming from one direction. Current U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has no more to tell his employees than his predecessors did, but now he has to deal with the problem spreading to U.S. intelligence and military personnel and their families working in Paris and Geneva. Those cities are now added to the list of others beyond Havana, in China, South America, other parts of Europe, and Washington, D.C. And the total of mostly CIA personnel affected is over 200. And it's quoted as saying, and as I said, we've got virtually the entire government working on this at the president's instructions. We're not there yet, but we will get there. We will figure this out. Meanwhile, we have to do what we can to protect people and, as I said, care for them. In an interview with MSNBC, Secretary Blinken sounds frustrated that people working for him are exposed to a new and spreading wave of mysterious afflictions that are suspected to have caused brain damage in some. While pesticides, mass hysteria, and other causes have generally been ruled out, microwave beams continue to be the prime suspect. But where are they coming from and who is ordering them? We've raised this with the Russians, but we still don't have a determination of who is responsible. So we've made clear that if they are responsible, or for that matter, anyone who is responsible will suffer severe consequences. But I want to be very clear, we don't yet have a determination. Is it more than a coincidence that these new incidents occur just as tensions are escalating between Russia, the U.S., and European nations over Ukraine? Is it a coincidence or intentional that 3 of the 4 U.S. embassy workers were sickened in Geneva, the city most associated with world peace talks? As we approach 6 years of the Havana Syndrome with no resolution in sight, it's puzzling that the U.S. government continues to be disorganized and even indifferent towards the affliction and the afflicted. While the CIA has always been involved, not a surprise since over half the victims work for the agency, Congress, the White House, and even the media have a hard time dealing with it. If it is indeed caused by microwave weapons ordered by the Russian government, perhaps the tension over Ukraine will finally bring it out into the open, a sad and potentially deadly way to resolve it. Our determination is to do everything we can to get to the bottom of this, and meanwhile, to protect our folks and to care for them. After 6 years, and it's time to do more. But what? See, and this is the thing. I had heard about this when it came out. This was when this started in Havana, and people that had gone over there, I believe it was with Obama, when he went to Havana. This is the first ones at the embassy that started experiencing this. And it's kind of scary because I have heard of stories of people being targeted, not like this, but like individually. And when you hear this, you're thinking, man, these people, their imagination taking off, maybe psychosomatic. In other words, that they've been targeted for whatever reason, or maybe what they're working with something like this. Things that make them feel ill, a lot of what they described here. And when it was a solitary person saying it here and there, it was like, oh. But then when you start hearing this, and my concern is not only, well, obviously what it's doing to these people, because some of these symptoms sound very serious, and if it's giving you also, I've heard that it can give you permanent brain damage or hearing damage, things that it's not like it goes away. Are they experimenting with forms of crowd control? Is this something that they're saying, what can we do here? Um, you know, where you don't have to pull out any type of tear gas or uh, anything that they use nowadays for crowd control. No dogs. You might not even have to put out military police personnel out. All you have to do is aim this at a crowd of people. I know some people think, oh, wow, that's crazy, Marlene, but you know what? Lately, our crazy world is doing an extra dose of crazy. So why not? Now why not? You know, this is like, some of the things. How can I say? Why not? Oh, let's like I said, let's stick with UFO. This one again, we're still on Mysterious Universe site. It's titled Marilyn Monroe: The Missing Government Files and Maybe a Few UFOs Too. Why not? Following on from my recent articles on the curious issue of UFO-themed government documentation going conveniently missing, I thought I would share with you what I consider to be the most sensational example of this on record. It's the FBI file on Hollywood legend, Marilyn Monroe. You may have seen my book on Marilyn and UFOs, titled Diary of Secrets, UFO Conspiracies, and the Mysterious Death of Marilyn Monroe. Throughout much of the pages of the book, I used the available FBI papers on Marilyn and on her untimely suspicious death in August 1962. Murders made to look like suicides and accidents. Classified government documents fallen into the wrong hands. Stolen diaries, some of them burned and shredded for fear of what, one day, they might reveal. Powerful people with dangerous agendas, famous faces. The feds prowling around, Hollywood conspiracies, CIA agents keeping watch, frightened people with secrets to hide, wild sex, drugs, crazy parties, and flowing booze. And an incredible story of UFOs, aliens, Roswell, Area 51, flying saucers, and the death of a beautiful but tragically scarred icon. Her name was Marilyn Monroe. You think all of this is just the outline of a big bucks movie? It's not. It's much, much more. The FBI has done a very good job of making available its files on Marilyn to all of us. You can reach them here. There's a link. There is, however, another angle to all of this. It's an angle that many people don't realize. While the Marilyn papers in the public domain most definitely make her fascinating reading, they only amount to 85 pages. And that's it. No more. Consider this. For someone who had affairs with the Kennedy brothers, who had a secret diary filled with government secrets, and who had an interest in communism, we would think that the file of Marilyn would be more than just 85 pages in length. But the fact is, that's all the FBI has on Marilyn. Nothing else. It's most definitely not the FBI's fault for the files being so small, as you will see. Now we get to the most important part of the story. A case can be made that at one point in the 1970s, there were huge numbers of files on Marilyn, but they were suddenly either destroyed or hidden. Maybe it was a bit of both. Here's why I suspect a scenario like that is the answer. When FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover died on May 2nd, 1972, there was a wild scrambling to try and get a hold of Hoover's own secret files. They were very different to the everyday files held at FBI headquarters. Around 48 hours after Hoover's death, his ever-loyal secretary Helen Gandy and Mark Felt, better known as Deep Throat of all the President's Men infamy, took firm control of roughly 20,000 pages of documentation that Hoover had carefully kept out of the hands of one and all, except, that is, for Hoover's most trusted employees. More than 150 case files completely vanished or were burned to a crisp. To give you an idea of the incredible amount of highly sensitive material that existed, it filled more than 30 large file drawers. What's almost intriguing is the revelation that the CIA's James Jesus Angleton, chief of the CIA's counterintelligence department from 1954 to 1975, helped with the destruction and the vanishing. More than a few loose lips said that wasn't all that Angleton did. He fled with an untold number of some of Hoover's most sensitive material. We can only speculate on what exactly was contained in those destroyed and missing papers, but there is a very good chance that some of it mentioned Maryland. Possibly a lot of it. Makes total sense. An official FBI file on Maryland and another file, a secret one, held by just Hoover himself. Those events of May 1972 made such a scenario more than just possible. Perhaps when Hoover died, such a file in Maryland was swiped by Angleton. Still hidden, still waiting to be found, and perhaps someone knows the full story of this one. If that is the case, then maybe, one day, we'll all get to see the other files on Maryland. You know what? And this is, one of the things that they said that the reason why they kept these files was on different people, low and high. In other words, it wasn't just strictly on powerful people. It was for blackmail purposes. In case they ever needed, like in The Godfather, someday I will come and ask you for a favor, that kind of deal. Sometimes they kept these files on even low-level judges, anybody, anything, and just tucked it away. Case, because you never know where that person would end up. Maybe they would ascend up the political ladder or the legal ladder or whoever. You never know. Maybe some case that in the little corner of the United States that people wouldn't think really mattered. For some reason, the FBI or the CIA said, we need this to be handled this way with this outcome. And but let's make sure it does go our way. And somebody, we get a phone call, a judge, an attorney, who knows, get a phone call or an interview or men in black. Let's go down that road and say, hey, you remember 20 years ago when you went and you did that and that and this and this and that? What? Guess what? We know all about it. And if you don't handle this the way we want, everybody's going to know about it. Yep. I think that a lot of these, sometimes people think that all these hidden files or destroyed files or whatever you want to call them, we just are either famous or powerful people, and I'm sure a lot of them are. But I also think that a lot of them didn't. I think a lot of them were sometimes people that maybe when it happened, they didn't think what's going to happen with this person, but they said, just in case, or we see that this person's going to go far. Let's hang on to this little film or this conversation or this letter or something. You never knew, or these photographs, and we'll just put them away. And if we never need to use them, and because this is the thing, if you think about it, let's go down with this, what he's saying, that they've burnt, God, thousands of files. And I think that part of the outrage that they fear is not basically what they've collected, but it's on who. In other words, that Americans will become aware, man, they've been spying on a bunch of people. And you would ask yourself, why did you get this info? Oh, because we've been collecting information on people that we believe at some point in time we might have to blackmail them or coerce them or whatever. And maybe that person never gets to, but in other words, that it wasn't just people that, and maybe they never even used them, but it was always there. And people would be, what? You mean all these nobodies, for lack of a better word, you guys were holding information on them, dirty stuff or whatever the case might be. Just in case, hey, you got this low-level politician. We got something. Yeah, you know what? In case he ever decides to run for higher office, we don't want him there. So if he ever decides to go up that food chain, we'll make sure that he just drops out of the race. Things like that. I mean, we're talking conspiracy. Let's go the full Monty, right? I found part 1. Psychics, the CIA, and Spacemen, part 1. What happened in Washington? Here we go. And then again, we're still in Mysterious Universe. For many years, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, denied having any significant involvement with the UFO mystery. This despite the fact that, as many had suspected, there actually was more to the United States' premier intelligence agency and its interest in unidentified aerial phenomena than officials had been letting on. During the late 1970s and 1980s, the agency continued its low-key interest in UFOs and UFO sightings, wrote CIA historian Gerald K. Haynes in his lengthy essay, CIA's Role in the Study of UFOs, 1947 to 1990. Curiously, Haynes explained that during the 1970s and 80s, quote, while most scientists now dismiss flying saucers reports as a quaint part of the 1950s and 1960s, some in the agency and in the intelligence community shifted their interest to studying parapsychology and psychic phenomena associated with UFO sightings, end quote. There had in likelihood been a number of reasons for this interest in a possible psychic component related to the UFO situation. However, at least one of those reasons might have had origins from within the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book files, and one of the strangest UFO incidents ever to have occurred within a CIA building in the heart of the nation's capital. Robert J. Friend, one-time head of the Air Force's project that investigated UFOs from around 1953 until 1969, shared the story in question in a 1974 documentary entitled UFOs Past, Present, and Future, re-released in 1976 and again in 1979 under a new title, UFOs, It Has Begun. The documentary followed the renewed interest in the UFO subject following a year of heavy sightings and purported close encounters in 1973. According to the version of the story Friend told in the documentary, in 1959 he was invited to attend a briefing in the security portion of a CIA building in Washington, D.C. Quote, it seems a retired Rear Admiral had information about a woman in Upper Maine that purported to have established contact with extraterrestrial beings. Friend explained of the incident. 2 naval intelligence officers were sent to investigate. End quote. According to Friend, the pair of officers met with a woman, and during their time together, she was able to demonstrate entering a trance, supposedly to establish contact with purported extraterrestrials. The woman was asked a series of scientific and technical questions, and according to reports that summarized the meeting, she was able to satisfy the officers that the information she related could not have been obtained on her own, and seemingly had been the result of telepathic help she received from extraterrestrials. Friend stated that according to the report, the woman had told the officers that there was an organization whose name meant the Universal Association of Planets, which was engaged in a project involving planet Earth. Then an unexpected turn took place, Friend recalled. One of the naval officers was informed by the woman that they, the extraterrestrials, were willing to answer questions directly through him, a naval commander and intelligence officer, but no prior experience in telepathic communication. He took over and attempted to write down the answer to questions put to him by his fellow naval officer. The officer was reportedly asked a series of questions that included whether the extraterrestrials he was seemingly channeling had preference as far as style of government, religious beliefs, race, and whether there would be a third world war on Earth. The extraterrestrials said they had no such preferences, nor would there be another war. At this point, it was determined that further proof was necessary, and the group in attendance asked if they could see a spaceship operated by the extraterrestrials. As Friend explained soberly in the documentary, the commander, still in a trance, told him to go to the window and they would have proof. Moving over to the window in the room, the observers then supposedly observed a UFO. I was told that the call was made for radar confirmation, Friend said of the incident, who was advised that the area in Washington at that time had been blanked out on radar at the time. After being briefed about the incident, Friend followed up with the officer who had purportedly channeled this alien intelligence and requested that the man attempt to contact the extraterrestrials again while Friend was present. Arrangements were made, and a time and place for second attempt at contact were determined. At the time of their meeting, Friend said the naval officer sat for several minutes and then appeared in the deep trance with his Adam's apple moving up and down rapidly. Soon he had fully entered a trance state, and the officer began printing large sheets on a sheet of paper in front of him in response to questions friend asked him. During the course of the questioning, we learned the names of some of the so-called extraterrestrials, friend said. One was named Krill, another Alomar, and a third extraterrestrial was called Alpha. All these beings were purportedly from the planet Uranus. The story sounds more like something one would expect to have seen in an episode of The Twilight Zone rather than to have heard about it in Project Blue Book documents. Appropriately enough, Rod Serling, who narrated the 1974 documentary in which Friend recounted the strange tale, appeared just after Friend concluded his narrative in the film, standing against a black backdrop and holding a folder in his hands. A cast that just as well could have been written by a very imaginative science fiction writer, Serling said dryly, but here in my hand is the actual account of the incident by one of the agents present at the time. So goes one of the strangest accounts, not only of the Blue Book era, but arguably in all the history of ufology. But how accurate are the events Friend detailed, which were based on the report he and Serling referenced in the film? In part 2 of the series, we'll look at what further information one researcher was able to track down about the bizarre story of psychics, the CIA, and flying saucers. Okay, now all I need to do is find part 2. Oh, they're going to do that to me. Okay. It's like before I could only find part 2. Now I can only find, let's see. All right. Don't you just love it? It's like, why don't you guys? Ah, that's it. Okay, well. In the meantime, until I find it, let me go down and give you this is a cold case story that occurred in Miami-Dade County. And you know what? I'm hoping sometimes that we talk about these cold cases and something comes of it. This is titled Unknown Unclaimed. A man was found dead. His identity was unknown when he was discovered in 1974 and remained that way. The medical examiners usually pair a name to remains found somewhere in Miami-Dade County, except for an occasional fetus or skeleton found in the Everglades. He's been one of those exceptions. On a mild winter morning of February 1974, Louis Severson, 75, decided it was a good day to fish from a canal in Biscayne Bay Drive in Keystone Point, North Miami. He did a double take when he saw about 150 feet off the roadway what he thought was a mannequin. He put his line in the water, but after a couple of hours with no luck, his curiosity got the better of him. He walked over to it, and then he realized it wasn't a mannequin. He drove around the neighborhood, hoping to spot a policeman, but like his fishing attempt, he met with no luck. He stopped at a nearby construction site and asked two men there, Dan Villela and Larry Gordon, if they would look at what he thought was a corpse. They returned with him and confirmed what the old man already suspected. There was no pulse and rigor mortis had just set in. The man was face down on a grassy spot 3 feet from some pine trees and 3 feet west of a dirt road leading to the canal. Soon the cops were on the scene, and the description of the man was white, age perhaps 18 to 25, 5 feet 4 inches, weighing 137 pounds. He had 70 cents in a pant pocket and nothing else. His head lay on an old sprinkler head, and nearby was a piece of paper with no writing on it. The most telling clue was the body's lividity. An investigator for the medical examiner later stated, the lividity was not all consistent with the position of the body. Someone had to have left the body there, placed it, or dumped it. There were multiple faint needle marks on both arms, and a trace of barbiturates were on the marks. Toxicology came back positive for opiates and morphine, both ingredients of heroin. The medical examiner found that despite the evidence pointing to an overdose, there was something different about this victim. His clothing were expensive and clean. He wore a new tie-dyed long-sleeve shirt, blue, 7 buttons down the front, 2 buttons on the cuffs. The label was Chutzpah. The undershirt, small, dark brown, heavy rib, was 909 collection. The denim dungarees with flare bottoms had no hems, front pockets only, and a purple label, Livins. There were no undershorts. The belt was 1.5 inches wide, soft dark leather, size 34. The shoes were soft moccasin type buckskin, lace up to the shins, size 8, U.S. patent gives a number, and there was a 3-inch fringe on the top. The medical examiner noted he had to have had money. And coming from a medical examiner who does this with a lot of bodies, they're aware when they look at clothing if it's expensive or not. The man's eyes were brown, his mustache was thick, and his hair reached his shoulders. There was a touch of blonde bleaching, barely perceptible. His teeth were excellent. Examination of the corpse found a 10.5-inch diagonal scar across the abdomen. His appendix was still there, but his spleen had been removed, most probably because he had been in some type of accident. The FBI returned negative matches to his fingerprints, and a bolo was sent out nationwide, and there was no response. Even Interpol was sent the information, and nothing came back. The students at Miami-Dade College Embalming School worked on the corpse and returned it to the medical examiner's office. Without anyone coming forward to offer information on his identity or what happened to him, he was interred in Pottersfield. But perhaps almost 50 years later, someone can offer a clue as to who was the young man that looked like he wandered from the movie set of Jesus Christ Superstar. You can contact the Miami-Dade County Medical Examiner's Office, reference case number 74393. Yes, and that is, yeah, like they said, the medical examiners, when you do this, unfortunately, enough times, you recognize things immediately, as in, people, like they said, he had cracks on his arms. Is this your addict living on the streets, hooked on this stuff? So, these people sometimes they don't pay attention to, either they're poor, because they spend all their money on drugs, or they don't take care of themselves. His teeth were excellent, and it's really weird because, like I said, nobody comes forward, or they couldn't match it up to any missing person. I hate to say it, sometimes if there's nobody to say that you're gone, I mean, what was that saying? No victim, no crime? Let's see if I can find part 1 of Psychics and the CIA and all that stuff. Part 2, yay, here we go. Let's finish this up. And back that mysterious universe, Psychics, the CIA, and Spacemen, Part 2, the story behind the psychic incident. The date had been July 6, 1959. The place had been the Stewart Building, a shabby CIA building located above a car dealership near 5th and K Streets in downtown Washington, D.C., although some accounts would later argue the events had actually occurred at CIA headquarters. On the afternoon in question, a small group of naval officers had planned to meet with a woman from Maine with a peculiar story. She claimed she could channel extraterrestrials. Over the course of the next few hours, the woman introduced these officers to her extraterrestrial friends and even allowed CIA personnel to have a glimpse of a UFO through a window in the room where the events occurred. Or at least, so the story outlined in part 1 of the series goes. One of the earliest sources for the tale had been historian David Jacobs, PhD, who wrote about it in his book, The UFO Controversy in America, after he had seen a handwritten summary of the incident in the files of J. Allen Hynek, which had been penned by Major Robert Friend, United States Air Force, who at the time had been the commanding officer of Project Blue Book. Jacobs then contacted Friend and interviewed him about it, and the story thereafter appeared in the film UFOs Past, Present, and Future, written by Robert Emeniger. I don't know, I killed that name. For many years, the identities of the officers that had been present during the 1959 incident remained unknown. Jacobs had been urged by Friend during their interview not to reveal their names. However, many years later, UFO researcher Todd Zeckel, a former intelligence employee who previously held a top secret security clearance with the NSA and the Army Security Agency, decided to look into the story for himself. Ultimately, after 2 years of legwork, Zeckel was able to track down one of the officers who had been present, a man named Arthur Lundahl, and get a take on the now infamous story directly from one of its participants. First, a bit of the backstory. The alleged medium, a Mrs. Guy Swan of Elliott, Maine, hadn't used psychic abilities to contact the extraterrestrials, but instead relied on what had been referred to as a sound-on-sound device, which produced an audible whistling noise. It is unclear if anyone other than Swan was able to hear this. In 1954, after sharing the news about her unusual arrangement with extraterrestrials with a neighbor who happened to be a retired Navy admiral. The latter wrote to the Office of Naval Intelligence requesting some of the information she was allegedly providing from her new space alien acquaintances to be checked out. How do you come up with that? This is my own comment. How do here you're a housewife in Maine and you get to do a sound on sound device? Okay, let's continue with the article. Long before the CIA became involved, the Navy apparently asked the FBI to investigate Mrs. Swan, who conducted an interview with her. It wasn't until 1959 that the main events of the story, popularized by David Jacobs and Robert Emenegger, would transpire in Washington. Although the main points of the story were correct, Lundahl's memory of the events differed slightly from the account written by Friend. Admittedly, Lundahl was somewhat known for having an interest in both UFOs and psychic phenomena. Notably, this was decades before CIA historian Gerald Haynes wrote that the CIA's interest in exploring possible connections between these subjects actually began. Present along with Lundahl, it was later revealed, had been U.S. Navy Commander Julius M. Larson and Lundahl's Assistant Lieutenant Commander Robert Neeson. It had been Larson that decided to try his hand at communicating directly with the extraterrestrials after Mrs. Swan's performance, although his written responses, Lundahl later said, he could see little more than childish scrawling. Of course, the most impressive element to the entire story had been the fact that two of the men in the room had allegedly gone to the window and observed a UFO, which had apparently been summoned by Larson. However, Larson's recollection of this part of the story differed sharply from Friend's written account as well, as Zeckel later outlined. At this point, both Lundahl and Neeson quickly covered the short distance to the room's only window and searched the sky for the promised appearance. Neeson, more eager to see something than Lundahl, noticed there were strange cloud formations, isolated turbulent fluffs that formed and dissolved before their eyes. Perhaps Neeson thought the promised spaceships lurked behind one of the many clouds swirling around the sky. But Lundahl says, at no time did I see a spaceship or a UFO, and to the best of my knowledge, neither did Bob Neeson. In spite of the fact nothing of any consequence occurred, Zeckel later wrote, other than Neeson suspecting a UFO lurking behind the clouds, both Lundahl and his assistant decided to report the trance session to Project Blue Book. The rest, as they say, is history, or in this case, an overblown story, which, after making its way to Project Blue Book leadership and thereafter to the files of J. Allen Hynek, would become one of the most peculiar footnotes in the already strange history of UFOs in America. So, I mean, I guess my question is the following. Obviously, they did or they didn't see a UFO, or maybe there was some clouds, but they actually didn't see a UFO. But I'm curious to know, did any of the things that this woman who was in contact with these ETs with her sound on sound device, did she actually produce any relevant information that could be proven, as an immediately, not like, well, is there going to be a World War III or any of those? That's something that they could say this, and they could say, yeah, you know what? She channeled this. There's no way she could have known it. So obviously she's got to be in contact with something, whether ET, God knows, but that could be. Again, it's a weird, weird world. And that's why it's part of Eerie News. So anyway, I hope you come back tomorrow or the day after. I'm trying to get these out, like I said, every day, but I'm not there yet. Please go to eerie.news, not eerie.com or eerienews.com. It's eerie.news. I've got articles on there, and of course, I'm also have the links to the podcast versions of these reports. I will talk to you soon, because it's a weird, weird world.